Welcome to Broadway Drumming 101. Today, my guest is Ed Shea, the man with gold and platinum records everywhere in his house. My goodness, how are you today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for the invite, Clayton.
I'm so glad that we connected. We have lots to chat about theater, but I'm going to start out, first of all, by just asking you if you could remember, what's your first musical memory?
Well, you know what? It goes back to I was very fortunate. My grandfather had a bar in the Wildwood, New Jersey area, which is down in South Jersey. And being a Philly guy, we would go to Wildwood. We had a home there. My grandfather would have bar bands in the summertime. So when kids in Philly wanted to go to the shore and to the beach and go to the boardwalk and pick up girls, I wanted to sit in the bar at night and watch the drummer. So that was the seed of my whole thing, was my grandfather's bar, which was called the Miami Beach Inn in Villas, New Jersey, which is right on Delaware Bay. So that's where I was grabbed by just the gold sparkle Ludwigs, the shiny cymbals, and it was a rock and roll band. So every summer he had two different bands that would alternate, and I was captured. I knew what I wanted to do. I wanted to play the drums. I liked how they looked, how they shined, how they sparkled. So that was the seed, Clayton. That's where it happened. So I was in, of course, grade school, and we would go down every summer. And then, fortunately, leaving grade school, I went to a high school in Philadelphia called North Catholic for boys. It was all boys, 4,000 boys. And I was fortunate enough to have a very fine band director by the name of Tony Marchione. Now, if you're doing theater, which I know you do in New York, you may know Nicky Marchione. Nicky did Holiday Inn with me and some other events. Well, that was his dad. So when I played my very first show in '64 at the high school, it was Do Re Mi, a Betty Comden, Adolph Green musical. Back in the '60s, Phil Silvers was the star of that show. And Tony told me, if you want to be a show drummer, you got to play mallets, you got to play timpani, because we have the girls from the sister school play mallets and timpani and be in the show. Tony Marchione got me with Nick D'Amico, and I think you heard Nick's name maybe through Joey Nero, because in high school with me, I was very fortunate to have great drummers, Joe Nero Sr., Tony Vigilante, and both of these guys wound up going to Curtis. And there was another great drummer, Ronnie Malik, whose brother is a famous tenor player, Bobby Malik, who does a lot of heavy jazz gigs. So that was where the seed really grew, was through my 4 years at North Catholic and studying with Nick D'Amico. And Nick was the first call show drummer in Philadelphia, also extra with the Philly Orchestra. And he was the type of guy that could go in and play a Sigma date and play a four mallet vibe chord chart or play congas. So that was a very important, I guess, progression. My grade school days to North Catholic, and I often wonder what would have happened with my life if I didn't go to North and meet Tony Marchione, who used the students for the musicals. Because a lot of times, even today, I'll do a high school musical, they bring in ringers, and there may be a few students. So that was the whole gist. And of course, Nick, doing all the break-in musicals in Philly in the '60s, like Sweet Charity and a ton of flops and Mame. I would be sneaking into the theater. Nick would do the Ice Capades. I remember they would rehearse Christmas Eve day. I would help Nick in with the xylophone. Nick, you think I'll be able to do this one day? So I always knew, Clayton, this was going to be my path in life. And my parents were very supportive. You know, we just lived in a row home, and I think my lessons with Nick were $10 an hour at the time. I would take the bus out to Havertown, Pennsylvania, which was a suburb of Philadelphia. And again, till Nick passed away, maybe 10 years ago, he was just my mentor. In fact, when I come into the basement, I have a picture of him coming down the steps. I always say, Nick, how you doing? I talk to Nick every day. So you can't forget the people that really shaped your career, and Nick was one of them. Just a wonderful musician and a wonderful human being.
Were there other drummers and percussionists that you were looking up to at that time other than Nick?
Oh, sure. When I went to the Philadelphia Musical Academy, then I had 4 years of percussion ensemble with Mickey Bookspan, who was part of that great Philadelphia Orchestra section, which was Fred Hinger, Alan Abel, and Charles Owens. Also in Philadelphia, there were some great drummers. Ronnie DiStefano was a great drummer who wound up doing the Mike Douglas show and then taking it to LA when it was out there. And then it was a bunch of great club day drummers, guys that really are no name guys, and then working like shows and all. Luckily in high school, I would meet other drummers from other high schools and exchange ideas. So it was never a competitive type of thing. It was very like, to this day, like with my buddies, sharing ideas. When we all maybe audition for a job, it's a very friendly competition. We're not out to get anybody. It's just, we just want to work and have a good time, and be accepted and respected for what we do, because it takes a lot of hours.
So in that boys' school, you were in the percussion ensemble, and did you play in bands as well on drum set?
Well, in North Catholic, there was no percussion ensemble. There was a jazz band, a marching band, and then we did the shows. So in order to be in the jazz band, you had to be in the marching band. So I had the hat with the plume, the red thing. And again, Joe Nero and Tony Vigilante, all these guys, if you were going to be in the jazz band, you had to be in the marching band. So we did the marching band. We did the jazz band. We did jazz band competitions with other schools in the Philadelphia area. And then, like I say, my first show at North Catholic was Do Re Mi. And that's when I knew this is what I want to do. This is exactly what I want to do.
Were you thinking about possibly doing anything else if this didn't fall through, like, having a fallback plan?
Absolutely nothing. Nothing. I never thought about it. All I know is I followed Nick around like a remora fish on a shark. I mean, and Nick was so gracious. I would sneak in the rehearsals. I would go to when the shows came into Philly and had break-in shows, like in the lobby of the hotel. I'd say, hey, Nick, and this was before Steve Weiss had a rental there, Clayton. So Nick would bring his 2 universal timpani, his little xylophone, which was a Deegan Jr., which I still have, a set of vibes. And this was the days before everything racks. You're picking, no Miller machines. So this is the 60s. It was looking back, it was a whole different ballgame. Now we got to have this hanging and that hanging. But no, I never, it was like, okay, I want to get out of North Catholic and I want to get into the Music Academy, which turned into the University of Arts. And I just knew my goal. And luckily, when I did get into the Music Academy, I started working the Valley Forge Music Fair, which was summer stock. So every week we did a different musical. So all through college, I was making as much, if not more, than my dad. So I thought, wow, this is everything I dreamt about. So, Valley Forge Music Fair, every summer I would do 12 musicals or some stars. And that was a tent. And that was the same chain as it was at Westbury Music Fair back in the day. And then during college, I got my first downtown show. It was called Your Own Thing. And Ronnie DiStefano was the drummer. And Ronnie wanted to leave because he was busy with the Douglas show. And that's the contractor of Valley Forge had me come over and talk the drum book down with me. So I'm in my second year of college. I'm doing like 50 weeks at the theater, at the Walnut Street Theater, and just loving it. So there was never a doubt, because it wasn't like, fortunately, I never had to live week to week. There was always something happening. It was just, I was just blessed with meeting the right people at the right time.
Your college that you went to was which one was it called again?
Well, at the time, it was called the Philadelphia Musical Academy. And then it merged with the Philadelphia College of Art, and it became known as the University of the Arts, which unfortunately just closed their doors this past June.
Is that the Kimmel Center where I played?
Well, that's down by yes. It's right by the Kimball Center.
Okay.
And it's unbelievable because there's over 1,000 students in drama, theater, dance, music. And I heard they were $50 million in debt. So, but that was my college. That's my degrees hanging up there from and I do have an education degree, because Nick said, hey, Ed, you're here. You never know what's going to happen. So I had a 5-year program. So the 5th year, I student taught in Philadelphia. And luckily for me, I never wanted to teach in a public school, but I did get the double degree when I was in school, And also in school with me was another great drummer, Jerry Brown, who wound up in LA, played with Diana Ross and Stevie Wonder. Yeah, so and Stanley Clark was in my class. So it was a great scene, really a wonderful scene.
When I was down in Philadelphia the last time, I was there in January. I was playing on the show that I started, Ain't Too Proud, but I subbed for the drummer who was taking a couple days off. And when I was there, I had a little bit of a deeper appreciation for Philadelphia. And I looked at the Philadelphia Walk of Fame or whatever it's called.
Yes, right
And
in
I was
front of the Academy of Music there. Yes, at Broad and Locust.
and then I was thinking, wait a minute, all of these people from Philadelphia, and I didn't really realize. Of course, I knew from when I was a kid, of course, listening to Philadelphia International Records, which we will talk about, and knowing that when I started doing Ain't Too Proud, I remember seeing a clip of Daryl Hall talking about the Temptations and how huge the Temptations were, and I didn't really know at the time. I knew the Temptations were massive, and they were like one of the biggest groups of all time. But I didn't realize he said that the Temptations were like their Beatles. Like and for him in Philadelphia, he would listen to the Temptations like people would listen to the Beatles. There were so many great musicians and artists. I mean, and there's just so I could go on and on and on. But I also looked at the Philadelphia International Recording Building that was once right kind of kitty corner to
That was a
the
Broad and Spruce.
yes, and I was like,
And
man, that's
yeah,
it was right there, and there was something else there now. Then I went to Sigma Sound, and there's a plaque there, and there's a building with there's nothing in it. I'm like, this should
that
be a
was over at
museum,
12th Street by the Reading Terminal. I'm going to tell you a funny
right?
story about that building at Broad and Spruce. So Gamble, Huff, and Bell, they're starting to make it, right? Now, here's a funny story about Tom Bell. He wasn't accepted into the Philadelphia Musical Academy, he told me. He said he wasn't qualified. And he used to call me Mr. O'Shea. Says, Mr. O'Shea, I could buy that building now. Well, you know what? They were very reluctant, the bankers, to give a mortgage to three Afro-American guys from West Philadelphia and Camden to buy this Center City building. Well, they paid it off in a year. They
Really,
paid it off in a year. And like Tom said, he says, I own the building. And he says, I could own the building that the Music Academy was in. But yeah, that building on the third floor and over on 12th Street, and the famous engineer was Joe Tarsia. And that's where I did my first record date for Tom Bell, was up on the third floor. It was 309 South Broad Street. And it was the O'Jays, Identify Yourself. I did two or three cuts for Tom, and that's the first time I met him. And yeah, but Philadelphia has a lot of history, a lot of great music. Of course, Philly Joe, I mean, Bobby Durham, uh, just the magnitude of the talent that came out of Philadelphia. So I'm living in Brigantine, New Jersey, putting in for my union card for Atlantic City. So my journey was Philadelphia, then I went to Atlantic City, and one of the guys, were living in a motel. We had to live there for 6 months in order to work the casinos to get into the Atlantic City Union. And one of the guys had a landline, and my mother at the time had the landline number. And she said, you got a call from Don Ronaldo. He was the contractor, did all the strings and horns at Sigma. And he was a real gruff guy, violinist. Hey, Shea, got a record date, Tom Bell. Make sure you do good. So, Clayton, I was so naive. I actually brought my own Ludwig Universal Timpani to the date. It was marimba. I didn't know that I could call Steve Weiss at the time and have a Yamaha. So I go up to the third floor, nervous as crazy, and I meet Tom Bell, who's just one of the loveliest men in the world. So right away, he's apologizing to me because this marimba part he wrote in bass clef. Well, it was a nothing part. It was a nothing part. I said, Tom, no problem. I can read this down. And then I overdubbed a couple timpani things for a couple tracks. And he just loved what I did and my attitude, I guess. He says, we have a film coming up this summer, The Fish That Saved Pittsburgh. It was about a basketball team, and like astrology. That's where the fish comes in. So we did 5 days. Now, this is the very first week that I started Caesars in Atlantic City. I've been on unemployment, putting in for my union card. I think that week I made over $7,000. It was like these, I'll tell you why, and I'm not bragging, but Tom Bell booked 6 days for this film date. We did the Silvers, we did the Jacksons, we did Teddy Pendergrass, Loretta Lynn. I can't think of all the artists we did, but Tom paid the rhythm section double scale.
Really?
But now we finished on the 5th day. You know that he still paid everybody double scale for the 6th day. Yeah, that night I think I'm working John Davidson at Caesars, and I had to be there. We couldn't take off. It's a brand new job. Tom would let me leave at like 6 o'clock for a 9 o'clock show at Atlantic City, and whatever I missed on that day, he would let me overdub the next day, whatever tracks I missed. So that led to the recording with the stylistics. We had a couple big hits with Denise Williams, Silly, Born to Take a Miracle, uh, Teddy Pendergrass, and then that led to working with Gamble and Huff. But they were a little different. Tom had everything copied beautifully, and I would say, "Hey Tom, I have an idea here. I think a shaker overdub or a little clave on 4. Mr. O'Shea, let's give it a shot." So, and I like that. So he'd let me, and he was always like open for suggestions. It wasn't like, no, this is the chart. You're playing vibes and marimba. He would always like say, "Mr. What do you hear? Do you hear it?" No, I think Tom, it's good. So I just want to do something for the sake of playing on the track. So if there was a nice shaker part, I thought, or a clave on 4, like if you listen to Denise Williams, My Melody, there's a little clave every other measure on 4. He put an echo. I actually ripped that off from a Lee Ritenour, a tune called "Is It You." I always liked that too. It was a Lee Ritenour thing with a funk singer. So we borrow and steal from everybody, and Tom just went on. Here's another great thing. So I'm doing the Andrew Lloyd Webber tour, 1990. We're off for like the month of May. Okay, not much happening. I've been out of town. Tom Bell calls. He's going to fly me to LA to do the movie City Slickers. We did one tune with James Ingram. I played timpani. Now there's 30 guys in LA that could do what I just did, but he was so loyal. He had Charles Collins playing drums, who did all his dates. I flew out. We recorded at Ocean Way Studios. So if you listen to the movie City Slickers on the credit roll, that one tune that James Ingram is singing, I'm playing timpani, and the timpani were awful. The rental, they were awful drums, but it came out beautiful. But that was Tom. He paid for the airfare. He put me up at the Sportsman's Lodge in Studio City. He was just such a generous human being. And when I went to his home, he lived in Bellingham, Mass, or Washington. When I went to his home, I said, "Tom, like, where's the gold record?" "Oh, no, Mr. O'Shea, I'm not into any of those awards." You wouldn't even know he was a musician if you went into his home. There wasn't
Really?
a piano in his living room. And eventually, those interviews that you heard with James Golden, I remember listening. James one morning was mentioning Tom became like a chef. He was a gourmet chef. He was into cooking. He was done with the music. He just didn't like what was happening in the music business today with all the technology and drum machines. If you listen to those dates, even the Delphonics, big string section, harp. He loved doubling electric bass and marimba. We did some great things with Lou Rawls, and I said, "Yeah." I said, "Tom, you got to give me a minute to look this over." And yeah, so Tom was just a wonderful human being, and that's how it happened with a phone call. I don't know why, because the vibist at the time at Sigma was a very talented jazz vibist called Vince Montana, who established something called the South Soul Orchestra, which was very big in the disco era. They would take like standards like "Fly Me to the Moon" or Brazil, and with a disco and background singers, and he made $1 million doing that. A very talented guy. So I worked with Tom probably from 77 to like 94. And then, we would keep in contact. And then when I was with Johnny Mathis out in California a year ago, December, we were in Costa Mesa. I got word that Tom passed away at 79, which was very sad. And it's funny because Mathis still does one of Johnny's tunes, "Betcha by Golly Wow." We still do that in performance with John.
Mm.
So, boy, a lot of connections, Clayton. It's just crazy, So, but to get back, that was and my Tom Bell connection. I'm I've left Philadelphia. I'm living in Brigantine, New Jersey, putting in for my union card. I'm all excited about the casinos opening and having, a full-time job working Burt Bacharach and Vic Damone at the time when there were nightclub acts, because that's not Tony Bennett, Sammy Davis. I worked all those guys on percussion.
Were were you in contact, or did you like know Vince Montana Jr. and Larry Washington from
Oh,
TSOP?
Larry played congas on every date that I played with Tom. Larry was on congas. And
Mm.
Tom used to kid because Larry would have like a four-piece set of music up, and he used to call him Biscuit. Tom had a nickname. He used to call me Cotton Top. Cotton Top. He goes, "Biscuit, what are you can't read a note of music. What are you doing with that music up there?" Yeah. Yeah, but Larry Washington was a sweet guy. I'm sorry, who else did you ask about? Larry Washington?
Vince Montana.
Oh, Vince. Yeah, I knew Vince because I did some of his dates, live dates where he would be playing jazz vibes, or I'd be playing timpani and bells and cowbell and shaker, like on the steps of the where Rocky ran up, the Museum of
Hmm.
Art. Like we would do summer concerts, and if my teacher Nick wasn't available, Vince would call me. So Vince would be in front of the orchestra, and he would solo over something, and I'd be playing the percussion book. But Vince was a very, very talented guy. And the last time I saw Vince was like before I started Newsies. I had a big drummers hang, Atlantic City and Philly. I tried to get all the drummers and percussionists because guys were dying off. And
Mm.
Vince came, and at the time he was very frail, and he died
Mm.
maybe a year later. But what a player! And in fact, I'm working on one of his. I'm working on "Fly Me to the Moon" that he did with the South Soul Orchestra, and you can really hear his bebop influence when he plays over the disco thing. He really was a bebopper, and he wasn't much of a reader. He was when the Mike Douglas show first came to Philadelphia. Vince was part of the rhythm section. It really didn't last long because they had piano, guitar, vibes. It was too much of a cordial type of instrument. And Vince wasn't the greatest reader in the world. I mean, and he wouldn't be the type of guy that would say, "Oh yeah, I want to do Sweet Charity as a break-in show in Philly," or or "Ain't Too Proud." It just wasn't his thing. When he got into that record business, he really created a whole niche for himself with the South Soul Orchestra. And like,
So Sal Soul was in Philadelphia?
yes,
I did
yes,
not I did not know that.
yeah. Yeah, if you now they may have gone to New York later, but if you look at some of the early things like Montana, where he did like when Star Wars was big and he did all this
Hmm.
type of space stuff, you'll see, arranged, conducted, and produced by Vince Montana. Now there were two brothers, Ken Sear and somebody else, and Vince told me they always wanted to pay off Vince with like TVs. Like they didn't want to pay. And Vince said, "I only have two eyes, man. I don't need 10 TVs in my house. No, we have to, pay the guys residuals, and, so, and again, everything was filed with the union. So anything that Vince has done or Tom Bell or Gamble and Huff in movies, we get that secondary payments, June or July 1st for all that type of work we did, which is,
Did
horizontal money.
did you ever work a lot with Earl Young?
Uh, No, but I met Earl. And now Earl claims that he started the disco thing. Now, and same with Bernard Purdy. Bernard is, but yeah, Earl again when it was one of the session guys. And again, when they hit with the Tramps, and Saturday Night Fever, But Earl was he used to come. I used to do Christmas concerts at the Gallery Mall in downtown Philadelphia when I lived in Atlantic City. I would come up and Earl would stop by once in a while, and Vince Montana. I was playing mallets, and we used to do the Stan Kenton Library of Christmas music. But Earl was very nice, and there was another great drummer, Quentin Joseph, who was at Sigma, and it's just man, it's the talent.
So the Sigma Sound Studios, when you were doing sessions there, was it like, I guess people would say it was like the Motown of Philadelphia. I mean, Philadelphia had its own thing because there were so many artists that came through that.
Yeah.
Describe what it was like working at Sigma Sound.
Well, some days there were things going on downstairs and upstairs, and like Bobby Eli, Bobby wrote a hit for Blue
Guitarist,
Magnet.
right?
I forget the name.
Mm.
A sideshow.
Sideshow, yes.
Yeah. So Bobby would be, he'd get done on a break, he'd go downstairs and record with somebody else. It was crazy at the time. But with Tom Bell, Tom had a sign on the door, no visitors. It was a close, wasn't like people would walk in and out.
Mm.
And it was rather tame because we get there at 10 o'clock. We probably didn't play a note till 11 a.m. So the sessions were three sessions a day, like 10 to 1, 2 to 5, and 6 to 9. And again, we're getting double scale. So we're doing four, like with a Lou Rawls album, we would do that in 3 or 4 days. And Tom was very laid back, and sometimes we wouldn't play for an hour and a half or 2 hours because he'd be overdubbing a synthesizer or a string line or having Bobby Eli or another guy, Bill Neal, who played guitar, Larry Washington doing something different, a different pattern. So it wasn't this anxiety-filled thing like subbing on Broadway.
Yeah, we'll get to that.
Yeah, it was very laid back. And again, now recording with Kenny Gamble or Leon Huff, I learned to bring a manuscript book, because they would say, "Oh, can you overdub that bell part?" Now I don't have perfect pitch, and I'm listening to the playback, so I would ask like Leon Huff. I said, "Look, could you play that piano line on the keyboard?" And I would scratch it out. Maybe we'd do 4 measures. Do it. So that was a completely different thing than Tom having everything copied, on the big paper, professional copyist. So it wasn't any type of anxiety. In fact, it was so loose because, we'd have, lunch delivered, but we'd always get done 3 or 4 tracks in a day. Always. It was always that type of thing. Now, I wasn't there when they did Young Americans with David Bowie. I heard there were people outside of Sigma Sound on 12th Street, like pitching tents, waiting for, it was bedlam. It was actually bedlam. And Tom, he recorded with Elton John. I remember him telling me when he went to Elton's house in London, he said he had like elevators in his home. And he gave, Elton at the time gave all his sidemen like Bentleys or Mercedes for Christmas. The money was just overflowing. But yeah, the Tom Bell sessions with Elton John, and I think they still use those things on like some of the football breaks, because Tom was the king of the intros. They went on sometimes, it seemed like, for 16 measures before, like some of the Phyllis Hyman stuff we did. So yeah, but Tom was a wonderful guy. And again, you asked about what it was like. It was really a very peaceful place. It was really family. MSFB, mother, father, sister, brother. They went, and I never did that track that they used for years on Soul Train. I think, I don't know if Vince played vibes on that, but I know it's Larry Washington that did probably 99% of all the hand percussion stuff at the time. Yeah.
So for people that don't know, Kenny Gamble and Leon Huff are co-founders of Philadelphia International Records, and Tom Bell was one of the main producers and arrangers, and he was often associated with the Philadelphia sound. There was TSOP, which is the Sound of Philadelphia. Now, that was the band generally that played on a lot of the 70s.
Right. That would be like, sort of like the analogy would be like the Wrecking Crew in LA or like the Funk Brothers in Detroit. So yeah, TSOP would be like that contingent of guys, that would be associated with the sound of Philadelphia. Yeah.
So TSOP and MFSB, is it synonymous?
Synonymous, same thing. Yeah. Yeah.
I when I was down in Philadelphia, I was looking up that information, and then, it's a bunch of black and white people, men and women, I guess, from the few, I guess, here and there, but it wasn't a thing where it's like you needed to be a certain color.
No.
Or a certain look in order to be, can you play? That's all they wanted to know. And it seemed like there was a cohesive group of people that loved to play with one another because
it was. And Tom Bell said, "I don't care if you have bad breath and your feet stink. If you can play, and Tom didn't allow any smoking or any kind of drugs. I mean, he was straight in the studio. It was a very cleansing environment, but Tom didn't care. Look, Bobby Eli was white. Uh, the other guitar player, I forget his name, and he played with the Temptations. White guy. I was a white guy. Vince Montana was white. Charles Collins, the drummer. It didn't matter. We went there and we just had a blast. And it's funny, speaking of that, all the years I've been working with Johnny Mathis, having to have in so many this and I've been working with John since like 70. I never heard John's conductor, Scott Lavender, say to me, "Hey, Ed, like John wants so," John would come out every sound check. "Hey guys, let's just have fun tonight." I don't think in the music business we care about that, Clayton. I
No,
don't
we don't.
see that. I
There was
really,
never when I even look back at some of the some of the new documentaries on the band that was in Muscle Shoals
oh yeah,
and how, they got together and played. It was four white guys, I think, right?
yeah, yeah.
And
Roger Hawkins and those
yeah,
guys, Duck
and
Dunn.
and yeah, and they played for all the funky stuff from Wilson Pickett to Aretha Franklin. It didn't
When
matter what you
Aretha
look like.
got there and she saw, well, Tom Bell's term for us white boys, he used to call us light bulb. Mr. O'Shea, light bulb. That was, but when Aretha got there and she sees these four white guys, this is what I'm hearing. Wow. And I remember when I worked with David Clayton Thomas at the Latin Casino, which was a supper club. It wasn't a casino. It was like an old time supper club in Cherry Hill, New Jersey, right across the river. David Clayton Thomas, who was the original singer with Blood, Sweat, and Tears. He did some dates at Figment. He came back, I remember, to the showroom that night, the club. He says, "Man, I just worked with a rhythm section." And he was blown away.
You moved from the Philadelphia area to Atlantic City.
Right.
And did you move from Atlantic City? Was that the very beginning of all the casinos back?
Yes.
Oh,
And it
really? Tell me
started in
about that.
76 with resorts. Now I hear the guys at Resorts International are making two, three, $4,000 a week because they're doing a production show in the daytime. They're doing like Sinatra at night. And so, this is big money back and it still is. So I always kicked around going to Vegas, but I thought Atlantic City, an hour away. So I went down there in November of 78 and I got a room at a hotel. And I had a buddy of mine join me, a guitarist, Tom Jacobetti, who was a big theater guy. So it was $150 a month we put in for our union card. So I opened up Caesars. Then I went to Bally's. Then I went to Trump's Castle. So I'm working 52 weeks a year with health benefits, dental, the whole ball of wax. And when we started, it was 7 nights a week. So if you wanted to work that seventh night, it was double time. So when I started Bally's Park Place, it was, that seventh day. But a lot of guys would sub it out, and give other guys a chance. So I did 25 plus years in Atlantic City. But Clayton, it went from 52 weeks a year. Now, as these acts are dying off, it went 52 weeks a year to, maybe like instead of 6 nights a week where Johnny Mathis would be coming in, it'd be 5 nights a week. And then Burt Bacharach would come in maybe for 3 nights, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. So now this whole business is shrinking. So around when I came off of the Andrew Lloyd Webber tour in the early 90s, I decided I'm not going to go back to Atlantic City. I'm going to go to New York. I'm going to give it a try because I'm just following the buck. I'm following that dollar. Of course, music, but I want to go where things are happening. So Atlantic City was great. When I did production shows for 3 years. In fact, when I was at Bally's Park Place, it's funny how things worked out for me in New York. I was working for a wonderful alto player named Lenny Hambro. Lenny used to play with the Gene Krupa Quartet back in the day. Lenny had a jingle house with Chico O'Farrell. So now Lenny's bringing me to New York to do jingles. Now I'm meeting like Ronnie Zito, drummer at Chicago, great drummer, Steve Gadd, Eddie Daniels, Candido on congas. So we're doing like dates. I'm coming to New York with Lenny, driving up at 5 in the morning for a 10 o'clock jingle. So when I got to New York, I did shows in Philadelphia and meeting different drummers that came through Atlantic City. I have a few guys now I can cling to in New York. And you always need somebody in your corner. I don't care what town you're in. And for me, a big draw was a fellow by the name of Larry Blank. Larry got me some of my shows in New York. So when I moved to New York, I had a whole bunch of guys I could call, so that I knew. And, so they started giving me sub dates. And then Mel Rodden, the contractor, gave me my first show back in '96, a
What was
show
that?
called Dream. It was a Johnny Mercer musical, a great swinging book, a great drummer, Tony Tedesco, who was with John Pizzarelli for years. Tony was the drummer. So Mel knew me from doing the Andrew Lloyd Webber tour.
What
So
tour was that?
that was with Michael Crawford. We did all the music of Andrew Lloyd Webber in
Oh, okay.
1990. So we went to Japan, we went to Australia. I think it's good for young guys in New York to do these tours and maybe leave that security of New York, because I think the contractors in New York can see the work ethic of a guy who's out of town for 10 months or a year and a half, no problems. He shows up on time. And again, this is what I'm talking about, paying your dues. And it's hard for a guy maybe with a family, a wife and kids, to be out of town for, Christmas and Thanksgiving. Yeah, I think touring is very important for maybe getting that home base established in New York City. And I don't think at least the guys my age, if you talk to any of them, I'm sure they've done some touring in their lifetime in the day, Mel Rodden and John Monaco, and of course, John Miller and Michael Keller, all those guys. So
Tell me two things. You went to Atlantic City in the mid '70s and it was booming, and then it started to shrink. What do you think were the factors that contributed to the decline of Atlantic City?
the acts were dying off. Sammy Davis, they're actually dying. And I think, of course, with cable TV, you could see anything you want. So back in the day when I would work Dionne Warwick and Burt Bacharach for 6 days, you just saw the audience shrinking. So the business was changing. I mean, now you got like the rock acts coming in, and even when I go into Atlantic City and I'm driving check into the hotel and I see the billboards, I'll say to Mary, who's playing viola on the dates with me, I said, Mary, do you know who these people are? I don't know. I don't know who these rock acts are. Or now, what do they have as a headliner in a showroom? A DJ. What? Are you kidding me? But that's a different generation. So that was part of it. So I knew I was either going to be the drum teacher in South Jersey, which I didn't want to be. I love teaching, but I'm a player who teaches. So I knew when that Andrew Lloyd Webber tour was coming to an end that I was going to wind up in New York. And my first apartment was in Washington Heights at 190th and Fort Washington for the whopping cost of $625. I thought I was going to die paying that because I still had a mortgage in my home in South Jersey. Now you can't find anything under like $2,000, right, Clayton? It's,
Mhm.
So the times are changing. But,
I t-
the touring, it all, like I say, it's all part of the journey.
I talked to another colleague of mine for this podcast, Damon Duwhite, and he said in the early '80s when he moved to New York, he said that he got on the 8 o'clock bus to get to New York, but the drum machine got to New York on the 7 o'clock bus.
Yeah. Yeah. And,
So yeah, so
yeah.
tell me about the introduction of new technology like the drum machine, or things that replaced percussionists and drummers, and
Well,
how did you adapt?
my first show that I used the mallet cat on was Victor Victoria. I'm subbing for Ben Herman, dear friend and one of the great players in town. So I got the mallet cat. Now I'm driving up from my Christmas gig in Philadelphia, and my station wagon catches fire on the George Washington Bridge. Fire! I see. So I finally got to my apartment. The car it looked like it was firebombed in Beirut. Now I got to sub my first show on Victor Victoria that next day, the matinee, and I'm really rattled. So I'm so used to like when you hit the timpani and you dampen, with your fingers. Well, a lot of the timpani cues are on the malacat. So I'm like hand dampening the malacat, and the conductor's looking, and I'm thinking, oh my God. Well, but I also, subbing for Jim Saporito on Goodbye Girl, Jim had the malacat, and you get used to it. I went down to Philadelphia a year ago, November, to finish out the run of Tina, and there was the SP Pad 80. And, once you get, and it was all programmed, and the conductor again was a sweetheart because I just walked in to finish out the run. So I think, the technology, not that I'm a real techno guy, but the meat and potato stuff, dealing with pads, but I'm an acoustic guy. I want to hear a real conga. I don't want to play on pads, that type of thing. But of course, if that's what it's called for, we're hired guns. You try to go in and do what you do. But the technology, like I said, I was even nervous about getting on Zoom that I didn't mess up with you today. So, but you won't. I mean, I'm a very. I don't have a lot. I just have enough equipment that I can work. I still have my Rogers drums that I bought in '64 with my paper route. Vibes, the xylophone I studied on with Nick D'Amico. Very basic meat and potato setup. I don't have darbukas and djembes and ricks and all that stuff. I'm a real meat and potato guy.
For people that don't know, a paper route was this thing from way back in the day.
Right, Philadelphia Bulletin. I would serve. I had 80 dailies and 40 Sundays, and that's what I bought my first drum set with. And being young, and speaking of young, I was always a proponent when I had shows to help out younger guys. For instance, Joey Nero Jr. I remember Joey when he was in the crib. And another great guy, Dan Berkery. I gave these guys I gave Joey his first sub on the Marty Short Show. I gave Dan Berkery his sub on Newsies, and Joe Nero Sr. called me. He says, "Hey, Ed, I have a student coming up, Dan Berkery. Would you mind meeting him?" I said, "No." I met Dan. I liked him immediately. And I said, "Look, I got my 5 subs. Would you mind maybe working your butt off for 1 sub?" "Oh, no, I'll do it." He came to the apartment. We went over stuff, and he worked at the theater. That day, I'm going out to dinner with Mary. I see the conductor's, Mark Hummel's name come up on my phone. I go, "Oh, no." He goes, and he called me Mr. O'Shea too. "Mr. O'Shea, your sub knocked it out of the park." And there's another really young guy who's going to be a breakout, a drummer, percussionist who just came back from the West Side Story European tour, a fellow by the name of Taylor Simpson. His dad was a studio or a Broadway guy, Scottson. Taylor is like, just when he arrives, he's 28, a perfect gentleman. But what I made a couple notes about people breaking in is, being humble, Clayton. You got to be aggressive, but you can't cross the line. And I would always answer any emails and thank people for inquiring about subbing and say I have my guys. But if I read into something that was a little over the line, I didn't even reply to it. So I think, like, being humble and just waiting your turn and willing to sub Christmas Day, Thanksgiving Day, when everybody wants to be with their families, everybody has to give you a break. And like I say, Larry Blank was very good with me, getting me like the Miss America pageant. And that's where I met the famous Don Pippin when we did the pre-records. Then we do that in Atlantic City. And that's where I got to work with Ray Marchica. Ray would do Miss America with me. And we went on to do other things, the Bob Fosse project, the FX series. So you never know who somebody's going to love you, or you may piss somebody off by saying the most innocent thing. So it's best just stay focused and come to New York. I always tell young guys, you're a winner just for trying it, rather than, I didn't move to New York till I was 40, only because things were dwindling.
Dan Berkery, I know he went to that college in Philadelphia. I keep forgetting the name.
University of the Arts.
Yes.
Yes.
And if somebody a little bit younger than him, somebody who's just moving to New York, says, Mr. O'Shea.
Cotton Top.
Cotton Top is what it was.
Mr. O'Shea,
Mr. Cotton Top. What should I know before I move to New York?
Well, First of all, you want to be prepared. And if you're going to be a show drummer, percussionist, you really got to have your doubles together. You really, again, you don't have to be an Ian Finkel xylophone virtuoso, but you're going to have some things that may put you on your butt. And, playing all that four mallet, marimba, Gordon Stout, and, all these stuff, they're great, but they have nothing to do with Broadway. I mean, to be honest, I think the only time I had a marimba in the pit in New York was for this little thing in Kiss of the Spider Woman, which was a two mallet thing. And it was just a repetitive thing and it was very exposed. But you want to have, I think, a good knowledge of how to deal with conductors. And, a lot of times they're going to give you notes and you're going to think, this is really jive. But you're not going to tell them that. You're just, you're going to, try to give them what they want. So having a good mallet background, hand percussion, and timpani, of course, intonation on timpani, just being spot on. And as a drummer, this is the big word, Clayton, you got to be current. Because these drum books now, they put in everything except the hiccup. I look at these drum books like Some Like It Hot, and of course, In the Heights, you really got to be very versed in that Latin type of playing. It's so, when I was coming up was more traditional, like Chorus Line was a big drum book at the time, and that still is a great drum book. But now I think for a drummer, you really got to be current and know like songos and Latin stuff and traditional, of course, big band, how to set up figures. But like I said, you need somebody in your corner. If you know somebody in New York, and you just got to be able to handle conductors and arrangers. And if something is written out of the range of the orchestra bells, don't be a Boy Scout and say, hey, this, just fix it on your own. Don't say, hey, this isn't in the range of the bells, and it happens, but just play the part, pick it down an octave. And if something's said to you, then you can, fix whatever you have to fix. But I think fitting in is a big thing. And of course, I think anybody that comes to New York, where did you come from, Clayton?
I was originally born and raised in Manchester, Connecticut, and went to college in Washington, D.C., and moved to New York at the same time you did in 1993.
Okay, so you were prepared and you had a goal. So, and if you think it's going to happen overnight, it's not. It's not. And the other thing that I'll tell people, don't call the contractors. If you don't email them, don't call the contractors. You'll be like calling like the CEO up of like Apple. Don't do it. There's a
Now, why is that? Why is that?
They
Why do you
don't want
say
to be
that?
bothered. These guys are like, they have secretaries and this, and they're dealing with, payrolls and maybe problems and sidemen and this and that and tours and and this guy's sick. We need a drummer to get out to Cleveland to cover, Ain't Too Proud. The drummer took sick. Don't call them. They're just too busy guys. Text them,
So,
send them an email, with a
so,
resume.
so who should they call then? Should they call music directors? Should they call other percussionists? Should they get in?
Well, I would call other percussionists, other drummers, and then I'll tell you this story. When I first met John Miller in New York, uh, I was down at the Club 88, club down in the Village, and John was there. I think Ian Finkel was performing, and I mentioned to John that I just moved to town. I did this and that, and he said to me, I said, can I send you my resume? He says, well, let me ask you this. Are you working for any of my guys? Are you subbing on any of my shows? I said, no, not yet. And he said to me, if you're good, I'll hear about you. So, and I was only in town for about a month when I got that first call from John Miller. Tony Tedesco recommended me to go out, I think, with How to Succeed, the road tour, which I didn't do because I was just out with that Andrew Lloyd Webber tour for 2 weeks or 2 years. So I stayed in town. But yeah, that's it. You call drummers or actually drummers, percussionists. If you have a friend who's an arranger or an MD and doing like off-Broadway shows, like a church gig, anything that's going to get you out there, anything will help to get you in there. And because it's, Clayton, it's a process, it takes a while. It really does. And I'm still trying to figure it out. I'm still trying. I'm still trying to figure
What's the most challenging show or musical situation that you were ever in, and why was
Well,
it
I think
so
when I was
challenging?
25, I worked with Frank Sinatra at the Latin Casino, the supper club. I was nervous, and usually at the supper club, the waitresses were setting up dishes, because there were dinner shows. And you could hear a pin drop, and Irv Cotler was playing drums. I mean, famous Irv Cotler. This is 75. So we get to the tune My Way, and there's a vibe part. Uh, the guitarist with Frank, I'm playing, and he screams over at me, "No effing motor on the vibes." He yells at me. Irv Cotler turns around and says, "Don't listen to a word that effing giddy has to say." I'm thinking, oh my God, I'm 20, and they're yelling at each other. So besides Sinatra being there and like eyeballing everybody, that was a little unnerving going through that at 25, and this guy yelling because I had the motor on for My Way, and Irv is telling me, "Don't listen to a word, this guy." And
Wait, so what did you do?
I turned the motor off, and I just turned it. And to this day, when I play My Way, because I work with this guy Michael Martucci, this Sinatra guy has the library, I always think of that story. And do you know the drummer Bernie Dressel? He's out in
I
he played with the big
Mhm.
fat Gordon Goodwin's band in LA. He does all the film dates. Well, when we do Mathis out there, we use two percussionists. So when we were in Costa Mesa, Bernie was the other percussionist. So I was telling Bernie the story about me and Sinatra being 25 and the guitarist yelling at me, at rehearsal, "No motor." So we're on stage and we're doing Johnny in Costa Mesa. And I see Bernie get up from his stool. He walks behind me, goes, "No SM motor on the vibe, Shea." So he's like, yeah. Yeah, but Bernie is like the big film guy out there. But this is the great thing about, playing these musicals is I think working with great drummers, like with Peter Pan, I worked with Steve Bartosik, Rich Mercurio on the Marty Short Show, Paul Davis on Newsies, Rich Rosenzweig on a Holiday Inn, Tony Tedesco on Dream, uh, Sean McDaniels on Some Like It Hot, John Redsecker over at Aladdin. And again, Clayton, I just feel like these are guys that I just feel like I've known in my whole life, although I haven't. It's only because of New York and the camaraderie of the thing, and we're all in it together, just trying to find a drum stool that doesn't collapse on you, right?
I was looking at a highlight of my conversation with Bill Hayes, and he said something very similar to what you just said. It's like, yes, we're all in competition for very limited number of jobs, but we all want the best person to get the job, and we're happy that that person gets the job
Yeah,
because we're all great musicians,
yeah,
and we want everybody to succeed. So it's a really weird combination of you're competing for the same things, but you also, we know that usually the best person gets the job.
yeah,
So it's like we're in it together and we want each other to succeed, and we're happy. At least I'm happy when somebody gets a gig. I'm like, good, you got your
yeah.
first Broadway gig. Oh my God, I'm so happy because you're gonna enjoy it.
Well, you
When
know
you
what,
want,
Clayton? Here's a saying, work creates work. So when
mm,
all those guys are working, like maybe Bill will use me as a sub. And because Bill is here, Ed Shea may wind up here. And this guy may, what I'm saying? And Nick
yes,
D'Amico always had a great saying. He says, Ed, half of the fun is getting there. And I can remember like moving
mm,
in Philly, like, wow. And then Atlantic City, boy, I got Caesars. And then moving to New York and getting my first sub at Phantom, like, boy, I hope Mel hears like Mel Ryan. I did a good job.
mm.
Again, it was that fun of getting there and being accepted. And to this day, it's still the same thing. It's a little different being my age because I mean, I don't want to go out. I mean, the only way I would go out of town on tour if a show was coming in, if I was going to bring it into New York City, like if it was starting like in La Jolla, out there, and then you would bring it in, different story. But to be out there for like, 60 weeks, trying to find my Italian restaurant, I couldn't do it. I did it and it was a great because I did South Pacific. I did Chicago, and we went to Abu Dhabi and Dubai, and that was a great
Mm.
scene. And it's a real experience and an education. Meeting. I love meeting the local guys in every city. I always loved, like with Chicago and South Pacific, you would meet that core of guys, and again, you would team up with them, and they were your friends. And the next week, you couldn't even remember half their names because you were on right to the new city. So
Yeah, I really enjoyed the times that I've done out of town gigs
yeah,
because you do get to hang with the local people. And
yeah,
sometimes you maintain those friendships, and when you go back there, you might connect with them again.
yeah.
So yeah, it's a good thing. So being in New York, you've done shows that lasted for a while. How do you keep things fresh when you're playing those shows?
Well, I don't have any problem with it, like, because again, this I'm living my dream. It isn't like I would go into Newsies after 2 years and feel like drugged. To me, every night was opening night. It's funny. I talk to people. They would hang. It's funny. People would lean over the pit. Don't you get bored playing the same thing? I said, I want to be home at 9:30. I said, what do you do for a living? Oh, I drove a bus for 32 years. So I said, no. I said, look, I said, this is a gift. And where else can you have a job where you say, I don't want to go in tonight. Hey, Clayton, can you sub for me tonight? I want to watch the Phillies and the Mets. So, I mean, it's a gift that we can take off. And, the only time I would go in if I was maybe had a headache, or not feeling physically 100%, that would change the scene. But other than that, it's like, man, I'm going to be done working 2.5 hours. I'm working with the best of the best. I'm making good money. And there's 20 guys in line that would just love to be able to sub for one night, just to get in the sub. And it's very competitive. It's New York, LA, Nashville, Chicago. When you come through the tunnel, man, you're competing with everybody. It's a beautiful thing.
Philadelphia 2024 as opposed to Philadelphia 1974. Do you like it now, or would you rather go back to the scene for back then?
Go back then. There's nothing there. It's like every other city. A show will come through, like Ain't Too Proud, or 15 years ago or so, I went down to do Motown for 2 weeks. I come out of the academy, Broad Street, you could shoot a cannon off and not hit anybody. It's a different scene. I'm sure there's guys making a living, of course, the Philly Orchestra guys, but a freelance thing. I mean, even guys that did club dates, 130 and 40 dates a year. I mean, every wedding that I go to, like my nieces or nephews, there's a DJ. And I usually go down to Philly because that's where they are. But no, in Philly at the time, that was a great scene. And I'm sure all these other cities, Cleveland, Detroit. I mean, God, look at those guys at Detroit. They went to their studio and there was a sign on the door, closed. I mean, Barry Gordy moved them out in the middle of the night, moved the studio. I mean, they were
Mm.
devastated. They didn't see that coming. And Philly, like Sigma doesn't exist or any of that stuff anymore. So it's a new era. And I'm never one to tell young guys, oh man, what a drag that you're in the business at this part of your life. I always think they're going to find their way. They'll find whatever it is. Like Taylor Simpson. Taylor's going out to LA and scope it out because there's a producer out there that likes him. He's a great drummer. He knows all the technology. He's a recording engineer. He does Pro Tools. And I think this is what guys have to do, to be in this world of ours because it's shrinking even more. And yeah, Philadelphia is, like I said, I went down to finish out that Tina run, and
Mm.
it's you leave the city and the crime. It's and even trying to find a parking space anymore. Where you don't have to pay $30 for like 3 hours. So it was a great town to leave. It was, and the same with Atlantic City. All those cities served a purpose for me in my career, and I could have either stayed and gone with the flow, but I always had this churning that really, like I said, if you can make it in New York, you can make it anywhere. From the New York tune, and I just feel blessed that I'm part of the scene, that I'm here, and I'm a New York musician and that I have wonderful friends and a great home life and I'm healthy. So I try to look at the big picture. Again, with the younger guys, I always try to tell them, hey man, you came to New York, you're a hero. It takes a lot to do what you do and find an apartment and call guys and the books I think are getting tougher, you know. Um, like I said, if you're not a Mallet player, then you wouldn't want to do Holiday Inn or Some Like It Hot. You know, if you're not a timpanist, you know, you don't want to do Les Mis or Phantom. You know, like me, I'm a drummer, but there's no way that I would go in and do In the Heights.
Mm.
I did just, and I don't have to. But I guess if I was 24, like you know, like the younger guys, and they're current, then they would work on that and probably do it. You know, so you know, so the road tours and everything has brought us to this day, Clayton, and you know, in our lives intersecting. And it's just been, I would do it all over again. I wouldn't change. You asked way back in the beginning if I had a B plan. There was no B plan. And if
Mm.
I had to do it all over again, this is the route I would take. It was just a
So
fantastic.
there be nothing that you would change from your life's
Yeah, getting
career.
married for 6 weeks. Yeah, that yeah, that as my buddy Tom Murray finally explained to me at Holiday Inn when we were talking about my marriages. Man, you got married out of spite. I said, Tom, after all these years, thank you. Yeah, but no, not really. You know what? I wish I would have moved to New York in my 20s when I met Larry at the Valley Forge Music Fair. He said, man, moved to New York. But I was so busy, I thought, man, I'm doing everything I dreamt of. So in hindsight, I wish I would have came to New York at a much younger age, like late 20s, maybe 30. And when Joey Nero took a couple lessons from me when I lived in South Jersey, I said, Joe, unless you get in the if Curtis, you go to New York. I said, you're not going to replace your dad. He has the whole town sewn up. You go to New York, and Joey went to New York, and you know he's just killing it, and he's just the sweetest guy and a talented guy, and no ego. And this is what I'm talking about, like Taylor Simpson and Dan Berkeley and Sean McDaniel. They're beautiful human beings, and they bring so much to the table in what they do. And so when I subbed on Cats, the revival, and Joey's next to me on drums, or a Bronx Tale when we're subbing together, or Aladdin and I can remember him in the crib. You know, I think one Halloween he was dressed up in a tux with a stick bag. He wanted to be like his dad, you know, a show percussionist. You know,
So couple other questions. You subbed at Cats in the 2016 revival on
yes,
Broadway.
yes,
You know, I don't
for
know why
Dave Rock.
I didn't I subbed there too, and I guess we just never connected there because
Okay, yes,
I was subbing for Bill Lanham.
you know,
Mm.
and that was weird subbing on that because I subbed on the original for Jack Jennings.
Oh, really?
In fact, this you can't see it, but this gold Musser M55, Jack's family gave this to me when he passed away. But
Mm.
you know, well, I'm subbing on Cats with two percussion, you know, guitar, brass. Now we do 2016, you know, there's no brass, and again, it's crazy how the business is changing very rapidly, and you just got to go with the flow, Clayton. So I understand, you know, guys wanting to say, hey, I got to think of another avenue, you know, to get through. You know, there's just so many guys, and when I get the union paper and I see new members, I think, wow, where are all these guys going to work? And the same when I talk to my buddies in LA, I said, you guys get new members by the hundreds every month. You know, people are flocking that they just want to give it a try and give it a try in your 20s. You know, you know, give it a shot when you're
Amen.
single and you can live like in a basement apartment and just go with the flow and not bitch and moan about every little thing. Like everything's exciting.
Yep.
Everything is exciting. That's when I saw Atlantic City, like with the acts, you know, like in the casinos, we're bringing in magic shows on tape. I thought, okay, I got to make my move to New York. You know, when
Mm.
the Lloyd Webber tour was done, I didn't want to go back. I still kept my home, but I got the apartment in Washington Heights, and
Mm.
it was great because if I got like I picked up 2 weeks of Greece in Philadelphia, So I was close enough to Philly that I could, which was my first local that I joined. I could still work in Philadelphia. I could still do a weekend in Atlantic City. Jack Jennings would call me for like the sub, like 3 and 4 shows a cat. So he would give me like a Tuesday, a double on Wednesday, and a Thursday night. So I had 4 shows. Then I Thursday night I drive to my home outside of Atlantic City and do a weekend of Burt Bacharach, which was another tough act to play. Very finicky guy. And so like, fortunately, as I told you in the beginning, luckily money was never an issue. There was always something there. And if
Mm.
there wasn't something there, there was unemployment. I mean, because all these jobs paid into it. So I took advantage of unemployment. I, you know, I did what I had to do, and something always came up. And it's just, you know, it's an industry of connecting with people, and again, that preparedness. And if you do maybe have a little disgruntled thing with it, if you think a conductor's note is completely asinine, don't tell him that. Just I'll try to give you what you want. Because he's going to have the final say, right? And we subbing, right? It's a difficult thing. You're coming in, you work on it at home. All of a sudden, you're either in a different room or you're behind a wall of plexiglass. You're working on different timpani. Maybe congas are tuned a little differently. A lot of variables. You're wearing a headset. You got to have a good mix in the phones. And Nick D'Amico, another saying, you got to think on your feet. You got to act on instinct and just go with it. If I have to play a timpani thing with vibe mallet, I'm going to do it. I'm going to. Mickey Bookspan used to tell us, whatever it is, play it. If you have to play a timpani part, and you have bell mallets in your hand, and you're going to miss the first couple of notes because you're making a change, forego the change, get to the timpani with the bell mallets, with the vibe mallet. Be there. Be there for it. And I always live by that rule, like the path of least resistance. I mean, Mike Balter over the years has made up a lot of double header mallets for me. So in shows, I'll flip, and play vibes and bells, and the same with timpani. I have like a timpani and bell mallet. So Mike was very good to me over the years when I was his endorser, So, I try again, path of least resistance.
I've never seen anything like that. That's cool. I
Yeah.
guess is that new or has that been
No,
around for a
and
while?
again, since Zildjian bought out Mike, they don't make those things anymore. So he would make that up for me. I said, "Hey, Mike, I got a real busy like vibe part, and I got to go to Bell's." And so he would make, "Well, what type of mount do you want on your vibe?" I said, "Give me just like a plastic bell mount." So I would flip it over,
Mm,
and I use that in Holiday Inn a lot. So yeah,
rich. I
you got to
have to
be
view.
resourceful, right, Clayton?
Indeed.
Think on your
Indeed.
feet, man. Think on your feet.
That's a great quote there. Where can people find you online? You have
Well,
website?
I don't have a website, but if you just Google Ed Shea or edwardwshea.wordpress.com, there's like videos there of different little performances and pictures of things, guys over the years and drummers and celebrities. It's just a mishmash of things. Uh, so I'm not a Facebook guy where I'm going to take a
Mhm.
photo of every setup that I have, or this is my dessert for tonight. I just, like I say, old school guy. Clayton. I had to have Mary here. Mary, make sure you stay close by that I get on with Clayton. I don't mess up the Zoom.
So
So,
I guess people won't find you at cottontalk.com.
no, not at all. No, no. Like I said, and what a credit to the drum percussion industry, what you're doing, that guys all over the world can hear different opinions. They may uh, agree with some of the stuff, all the stuff, but still, it's like, okay, this guy said this guy said that, and all three of our four are in agreement. So if I go to New York, I want to be prepared. I want to be humble. I don't want to call up John Miller and say, "You don't know me, but dial tone, dial tone." You know, and in today's
There's
world,
it's funny. You talked about a couple of things. You said the paper route, dial tone, a couple of things that people are like, what is a dial
Yeah.
tone? What
Yeah.
is a paper route?
Yeah. I know, and it's funny because one of the comedians with Mathis, he says, my son says, Dad, I want to buy you a GPS. I want to buy you. You're always getting lost. For $125, I want to buy you a GPS. He says, I have something called an MAP that cost me 50 cents, a map.
We could talk for hours
I
and
hope you
hours and
got what you.
hours.
Hey, let's keep in touch, Clayton. And
Yes, indeed.
anything I can do for you, I will. Well, listen, I'll let you run.
All righty.
And just a great guy, man. I wish I would have met you in '93 when we broke in together. Clayton,
Yes, I
God
would.
bless you, man, and your family. Great success and good health, and we'll be in touch.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, Clayton. Thanks,
All
buddy.
right.
To continue producing the high-quality podcast you're listening to, publishing engaging newsletter content, and posting YouTube videos, we would appreciate any financial contributions you can make. At this time, we have no advertisers, and we'd like to keep it that way. Our staff is small but growing. We can only produce a show with listener contributions from people like you. There are a couple of ways you can do that. You can sign up to be a monthly or annual subscriber at BroadwayDrumming101.com. You can also contribute any amount you wish through PayPal at paypal.me/BroadwayDrumming101 or through Venmo at BroadwayDrumming101. Or help keep us caffeinated by buying us a cup of coffee or a week's worth at buymeacoffee.com/BD101. That's buymeacoffee.com/BD101. We appreciate any support you can give. Don't forget to subscribe to the Broadway Drumming 101 YouTube page. You'll find more content that isn't featured on the podcast or on the Broadway Drumming 101 Instagram page. Make sure when you subscribe to the YouTube page, you click on the button to be notified when a new video is published.